Chapter 19 of Anna Karenina, Book 5, by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. So Levin thought about his wife as he talked to her that evening. Levin thought of the text, not because he considered himself wise and prudent. He did not so consider himself. But he could not help knowing that he had more intellect than his wife and Agafea Mihalovna. And he could not help knowing that when he thought of death, he thought with all the force of his intellect. He knew too that the brains of many great men, whose thoughts he had read, had brooded over death, and yet knew not 1/100th part of what his wife and Agafea Mihalovna knew about it. Different as these two women were, Agafea Mihalovna and Katya, as his brother Nikolay had called her, and as Levin particularly liked to call her now, they were quite alike in this. Both knew without a shadow of a doubt what sort of thing life was and what was death, and though neither of them could have answered, and would even not have understood the question that presented themselves to Levin, both had no doubt of the significance of this event, and were precisely alike in their way of looking at it, which they shared with millions of people. The proof that they knew for a certainty the nature of death lay in the fact that they knew without a second of hesitation how to deal with the dying and were not frightened of them. Levin and other men like him, though they could have said a great deal about death, obviously did not know this, since they were afraid of death and were absolutely at a loss what to do when people were dying. If Levin had been alone now with his brother Nikolay, he would have looked at him with terror, and with still greater terror waited, and would not have known what else to do. More than that, he did not know what to say, how to look, how to move. To talk of outside things seemed to him shocking, impossible. To talk of death and depressing subjects, also impossible. To be silent, also impossible. If I look at him, he will think I am studying him, I am afraid. If I don't look at him, he'll think I'm thinking of other things. If I walk on tiptoe, he will be vexed. To tread firmly, I'm ashamed. Kitty evidently did not think of herself, and had no time to think about herself. She was thinking about him, because she knew something, and all went well. She told him about herself even, and about her wedding, and smiled and sympathized with him, and petted him, and talked of cases of recovery, and all went well. So then she must know. The proof that her behavior and Agafea Mihalovna's was not instinctive, animal, irrational, was that apart from the physical treatment, the relief of suffering, both Agafea Mihalovna and Kitty required for the dying man something else more important than the physical treatment, and something which had nothing in common with physical conditions. Agafea Mihalovna, speaking of the man just dead, had said, "Well, thank God, he took the sacrament and received absolution. God grant each one of us such a death." Katya, in just the same way, besides all her care about linen, bed-sores and drink, found time the very first day to persuade the sick man of the necessity of taking the sacrament and receiving absolution. On getting back from the sick room to their own 2 rooms for the night, Levin sat with hanging head, not knowing what to do. Not to speak of supper, of preparing for bed, of considering what they were going to do. He could not even talk to his wife, He was ashamed to. Kitty, on the contrary, was more active than usual. She was even livelier than usual. She ordered supper to be brought, herself unpacked their things, and herself helped to make the beds, and did not even forget to sprinkle them with Persian powder. She showed that alertness, that swiftness of reflection comes out in men before battle, in conflict, in the dangerous and decisive moments of life, those moments when a man shows once and for all his value, and that all his past has not been wasted, but has been a preparation for these moments. Everything went rapidly in her hands, and before it was 12 o'clock, all their things were arranged cleanly and tidily in her rooms, in such a way that the hotel rooms seemed like home. The beds were made, brushes, combs, looking-glasses were put out, table napkins were spread. Levin felt that it was unpardonable to eat, to sleep, to talk even now, and it seemed to him that every movement he made was unseemly. She arranged the brushes, but she did it all so that there was nothing shocking in it. They could neither of them eat, however, and for a long while they could not sleep and did not even go to bed. "I am very glad I persuaded him to receive extreme unction tomorrow," she said, sitting in her dressing jacket before her folded looking-glass, combing her soft fragrant hair with a fine comb. "I have never seen it, but I know, mamma has told me, there are prayers said for recovery." "Do you suppose he can possibly recover?" said Levin, watching a slender tress at the back of her round little head that was continually hidden when she passed the comb through the front. "I asked the doctor. He said he couldn't live more than 3 days. But can they be sure? I'm very glad, anyway, that I persuaded him," she said, looking askance at her husband through her hair. "Anything is possible," she added, with that peculiar, rather sly expression that was always in her face when she spoke of religion. Since their conversation about religion when they were engaged, neither of them had ever started a discussion of the subject, but she performed all the ceremonies of going to church, saying her prayers and so on, always with the unvarying conviction that this ought to be so. In spite of his assertion to the contrary, she was firmly persuaded that he was as much a Christian as she, and indeed a far better one. And all that he said about it was simply one of his absurd masculine freaks, just as he would say about her broderie anglaise, that good people patch holes, but that she cut them on purpose, and so on. "Yes, you see this woman, Marya Nikolaevna, did not know how to manage all this," said Levin, "and I must own I'm very, very glad you came. You are such purity that...." He took her hand and did not kiss it. To kiss her hand in such closeness to death seemed to him improper. He merely squeezed it with a penitent air, looking at her brightening eyes. "It would have been miserable for you to be alone," she said, and lifting her hands which hid her cheeks, flushing with pleasure, twisted her coil of hair on the nape of her neck and pinned it there. "No," she went on, "she did not know how. Luckily, I learned a lot at Soden." "Surely there are not people there so ill?" "Worse." "What's so awful to me is that I can't see him as he was when he was young. You would not believe how charming he was as a youth, but I did not understand him then." "I can quite believe it. How I feel that we might have been friends," she said,